but anyone who wants to ask a question, we can put them on.
Okay, and if there's some other way to kick me out because I'm in again twice, I don't know what's going on.
I would just ignore it.
Okay, fantastic.
And we are live.
Well, Sohoraim Tovim, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Rabbi Carney Rose, and I'm the Rabbi of Congregation B'nai Emunah, and I'm joined by Rabbi Daniel Bogart of the Central Reform Congregation and Rabbi Jim Bennett of Shar Emeth Congregation. We're delighted to be together. You will note today that our fourth member of our Four Rabbis session, Maharat Rory Picker-Niece of the Jewish Community Relations Council, is not with us today. She is otherwise occupied. And so we will do our best to try to keep things going without Rory, though it will be somewhat difficult. But we look forward to reconvening, not next month and not in the month of July. We will let you know, we're hoping maybe August and September to get back together again, but we'll keep you posted on all of that. We've been asked to continue these wonderful sessions. Before we get started today, just to kind of prepare you to think about, today's session is going to be a little different. We've been asked to do an Ask the Rabbi session, and you should feel free to ask any question that you wish to ask. Rabbi Bogart, who is our tech wizard, in addition to being a wonderful rabbi, is going to make sure that all the questions that are being asked will be asked, and he can say a word about that in just a moment before we get started. But we should, of course, give due to our wonderful institution that helped prepare us in many ways for the rabbinates that we have today, in addition to the seminaries where we were trained and all the teachers that we had, both as undergraduates and graduate students. We thank the STL Hartman Institute, because at Hartman, many of us received tremendous inspiration, guidance, new grist for our own creative mills. And even this opportunity to get together, I think probably wouldn't have happened without the STL Hartman Institute. So we thank STL Hartman Institute and, of course, Rabbi STL Hartman and Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer and all those who have made this learning so available, not only to us, but to many, 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 many rabbis and lay people throughout the world. And so without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Rabbi Bogart, who will let us know how you can begin to ask the rabbis questions. And we are waiting for all of this with bated breath, actually. I'm sort of excited about this session. So, Bevakasha, Rabbi.
Yeah, thank you, Carney. Good to be with you both. We miss Rory. If you're streaming from wherever you are, Rory, hello. Though hopefully you're not streaming and enjoying whatever vacation you're having. So we would love your questions. So if you are in the Zoom room right now, if you're in the webinar, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A. If you go ahead and click that, we will make sure that they get addressed. You click that and you type in your question. If, however, you are on a stream, if you're watching this on Facebook or on YouTube, I have something open that is capturing all of the chats. So go ahead and comment wherever you are with your question, and we will bring it in.
I'm just so impressed that you know how to do all of this, Daniel. That to me is amazing.
Maybe if I'd gone to work in Silicon Valley and done the Jewish stuff, not as my profession, the finances would be different too,
Yeah, we have a question in the Q&A from Leslie Kaplan, who asks she'd like to hear about what the Hartman Institute is and what it does, which I think is a really great starting point for.
Wonderful. So as they say, hamatchil b'mitzvah, omrim lo gemor. One who starts with the mitzvah, you say finish. So Rabbi, you get to go first since you raised the issue.
Well, I'm happy to say a few words about the Hartman Institute. The Hartman Institute is an institution for Jewish learning that lives primarily in Jerusalem, although it now is affiliated with its North American branch, the Hartman Institute North America. It was begun many years ago. I remember, as an aside, as a rabbinic student in the late 1970s, there was a place of Jewish creativity and learning where Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory would teach shirim, and it was a small little house on the edge of the German colony, just below the Jerusalem Theater in Jerusalem. And we would go there as rabbinic students from time to time to attend shirim lessons of just beautiful Torah wisdom that were being taught by Rabbi Hartman of blessed memory and others At the time, I don't think we knew or even could begin to imagine what that institution of Jewish learning would become over the many decades since. And I don't actually know the specific history of when Rabbi Hartman, David Hartman, created the institution that we now know as the Hartman Institute. I don't actually know. I know that I learned about it from a variety of sources 10 or 15 years ago, when I learned that there was this place in Jerusalem where rabbis were going to study in the summer. And it was like friends of mine said, "Are you going to study at Hartman?" And I said, "What do you mean going to study at Hartman? I don't know what it is." But I went with a friend of mine, a fellow Reform rabbi, who said, "You've got to come." And I spent 10 days studying there and was captivated and amazed at this place of learning where rabbis from all over the world, literally, particularly North American rabbis, but rabbis from all over the world, of all streams of Judaism, came together to sit in chavruta, in scholarship together with a learning partner, and then to study text in a way that I, as a Reform rabbi, certainly had never studied text before, in chavruta, in partnership, and then to listen to what were the most brilliant lectures and shiurim, lessons on topics of every imaginable sort, delivered in particular by our Rav, Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory, who just inspired and challenged us, and also his son, Rabbi Daniel Hartman, who now is the director and president of the Hartman Institute, and countless other scholars in residence of every variety, philosophers and textual scholars and poets and musicians and politicians and characters of every sort, who just inspired me. And so I, along with you, Daniel, followed in your footsteps, Carney, on when we were invited to apply for a more intensive learning experience and to become fellows of the Hartman Institute, which we did in a 4-year intensive learning experience. And I continue. I haven't been a number of years. I'm going back this summer for 2 weeks for a recharge of the batteries. But the thing for me that I love about the way we learn at Hartman is we learn with openness and humility and a sense of curiosity about the text and a willingness to learn with others who are patient with those of us who may be less familiar with the classic text and equally interested in our points of view as their own and the point of view of tradition. And I never cease to learn there.
That's wonderful.
I'm sure you guys have lots to add.
Yeah, really wonderful summary. Yeah, that's wonderful. Hello, Tula. Tula, you're not involved. Well, we do have 4 rabbis, though, or at least somebody with rabbit ears, but that's okay. I wanted just to add something interesting. The history is not so well known to me either of the Shalom Hartman Institute, though, of course, Shalom Hartman was the brother of Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory. And it was named for his brother who had passed before our Rabbi Hartman, or our first Rabbi Hartman, David Hartman. But I do remember a tale that is kind of interesting. In the early 70s, 70 to 72, in and around that time, we were actually on sabbatical in Israel with our family. My father is an academic and was on sabbatical. And there was this meeting of these interesting rabbis who were all talking about the need for a post-denominational kind of experience that would kind of happen in Jerusalem. It was needed. And so a whole host of rabbis came together. Sorry, his father, I apologize. Did I say brother? I said father, I apologize, Shalom Hartman. Who I apologize. The dog's a little distracting. I just want to make sure she doesn't make a pee-pee on the floor here. So that'll be really good. But all of that being said, I have this recollection that these rabbis got together. And who were these rabbis? Well, many of them were the rabbis who were the founding rabbis of Pardes, for example, or people like Aryeh Strakovsky, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who went off and started his own place. So there were these rabbis who were in and around Jerusalem, which is a city of, unbelievable potential and unbelievable diversity, coming together. And wanting to create an institute where people could, of all disciplines, of all orientations, of all backgrounds, could come together, both from North America as well as from Israel. And so there was this kind of creativity, maybe it was kind of an axial age of creativity. And out of that, many institutions were formulated, including Pardes, including the Hartman Institute, and many others, including Rev Steinsaltz's work that he did, of course, starting his organization that was known as Aleph, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was an interesting time, right before the war, right after one war into the next war. There was this period of time of creativity and people coming to Jerusalem, looking for Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, out of Jerusalem, out of Zion will come Torah, and a diversity of Torah. I only wondered to myself if the Messiah would have arrived had those rabbis been able to formulate an institution where they all could have sat together. Might have changed the face of the Jewish world completely, or at least the face of the Israeli Jewish world, but probably the North American Jewish world as well, or worldwide. But I kind of was an interesting reality. But I'll say for me, just the one piece about Hartman was most of the rabbis that I admired and respected were rabbis who had gone to study at Hartman. And I think that's a really key thing, right? And I remember I was early on invited to participate, and I had little children at the time. And that was tough to do because if you had your summers, we as rabbis have very little time together with our families. And so we really wanted to cherish that time. And we were actually going to Israel. And we were going to Israel and we're spending the time together. And I was doing some learning, but not the kind of intensive learning we did at Hartman. And ultimately, I kept on running into all of these wonderful rabbis that I really, really admired, whose eyes looked like they were aglow from the study they were doing at Hartman. And they seemed happy and they seemed enjoying themselves, and they were in these discussions and debates. And by the way, they came from across the denominational spectrum. So people I knew from the Reform movement, Conservative movement, Orthodox world, people I really, really liked and admired, and said, I got to get in on this. So as soon as Paula gave me permission to do so, I said, we're going to able to do it. I will say that one thing that's very important about the Machon, about the Institute, at least from my perspective, is the Institute is a growing, learning entity. When first came, there was no childcare. There was no sense that there was family. There was no sense. We were just sort of brains that were dropped in a place, and they're going to pump information into us. And over the course of time, the Institute has really modified itself to understand that rabbis are coming with family, and very often the rabbis need not only to recharge themselves, grist for their intellectual and spiritual meal, but they also just need menucha, they need rest. And so the Institute itself learned. And I think the Institute at today is a different institute because of those early pioneers who were engaged and involved, and made it more able for us to have the kind of, I think, more integrated, more organic, more holistic approach. And so theater, music, dance, food, all of those things got integrated, not just sort of heavy duty intellectual learning. And for that, I thank the Institute, and also all the stuff that they're putting out that's available online, right? The podcasts and the videos and the materials. The Machon has just grown and grown and grown. And I would say if there is one place that is providing, for me at least, the most chizuk, the most strengthening for my rabbinic teaching, it not that I agree with everybody and every educator, but I just think the way in which they've gone about doing this, allowing us to take their Torah and then kind of play jazz with it, has been really, and I sense that they're very proud of the work that's happening, particularly this coming together of the four rabbis. So Rabbi Bogart, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah. Thank you for what both of you said. And I totally am yes to all of it. I guess I'll throw it for me. I did Hartman. I did the RLI program at the very beginning of my rabbinic career. I think I'd only been out for a year at that point, which is pretty unusual. Almost everyone was really mid-career, right? Jim, you in many ways were the typical Hartman fellow. And in fact, I used to joke that at all of our sessions, you sat to my left, both, figuratively and metaphorically. I don't know if that's true anymore, but, Hartman was the first place that I really felt at home Jewishly in profound senses, movement wise. Right. I never felt at home in the reform movement. I've never been to a URJ biennial or a CCAR convention or anything like that. But at Hartman, we were studying such incredible ideas, which with such world-class educators, in an environment where there was no hierarchy of movement, right? Like there's so many places where, whether it's externally imposed or whether we just kind of carry it with us internally, where there's this sense that it's like the Orthodox, the conservative, the Reform, right? And Hartman brought us all to a table and presented us all with the same text and gave it to us as something that we all equally owned and all equally had claim onto. And basically every discussion I've had with another rabbi at Hartman has been about trying to understand their perspective and their understanding of a text, rather than trying to convince them of my perspective and my understanding of a text. And that to me is core for what Hartman is, and I think is core to what we've formed here. And certainly for me, my rabbinic chevra, both here in St. Louis and more broadly, are Hartman rabbis. And it's the best learning I've ever done. I mean, truly, undergrad, rabbinical school, it's the best learning I have ever done. I'm so grateful for it, and transform my rabbinate. I am a very different rabbi and think very differently about Jewish ideas because of Hartman.
But also
Okay,
maybe some of the best people, really the best people, not just rabbis and learning, but the best people who were really committed to these notions that seem so core to so many of us, right? In terms of pluralism in particular, that, I mean, the way you described it, and your eyes lit up as you talked about it, but I could also feel a little bit of pain in what you were saying, right? Sometimes the rabbinate can be quite lonely. Yeah, can be a little lonely.
I don't think I felt like a real rabbi, an authentic rabbi, until I graduated Hartman. It wasn't my ordination that made me feel that way.
Yeah, I want to echo what you said. I also wanted to answer another question that was asked, just to say, I was a little intimidated at first when I signed up to study at Hartman, because I was afraid that as a Reform rabbi whose rabbinic education, while serious and deep, had not immersed me in studying Talmud in particular. I was intimidated and worried that I might, although my Hebrew is quite good, my Talmud experience was limited. I was intimidated, but I was thrilled to learn that the Hartman modality of learning permits and is expandable to respond to the needs of all the learners. So we could study, and we do study in Hebrew. We also study in English. Most of the shirim and lectures are delivered in English, although occasionally they are delivered in Hebrew if the teacher or the person leading the session is fluent in Hebrew. But there's an openness and an expandability and a welcomeness to people learning. I put in the chat a link to the online resources of Hartman. And I also wanted to say there are summer programs and other programs in Israel and also around the world now that are open to non-rabbis. The community leadership program is available to people who want to study at Hartman, who are community leaders and members of Jewish communities. And there are more and more ways for people to access
in the early years, there were actually cohorts of Hillel directors, some rabbis, some non-rabbis. There were academic. There was an academic cohort, which was fascinating. And obviously, there are Christian clergy who came together for programming. Now, Muslim clergy were coming together, and Hartman is hosting all of this. I also just want to mention, I don't know if the two of you had the same experience, but during my time there, we had some really wonderful interfacing with some of the intelligentsia from the IDF, from the Israeli Defense Forces.
Yeah. Because they do the ethics training. Yeah.
That's right. And it was for us, right, as rabbis coming from North America, just profoundly, I think, moving, watching all of these high-level ranking officers walk in complete uniform and regalia, and then sitting down with us and having these wonderful and deep conversations, and understanding that whether we agree or disagree with what happens in Israel, there is a group of folks who are thinking about this very, very clearly with profound moral compasses, right? Trying to understand how to make the state of Israel what we all want it to be. All of us included, right? With its imperfections and all. But they were discussing, debating, and agonizing as we were agonizing about it. In some way, I felt, talk about intimidated. Here are these people who are obviously heroes and heroines, right? Who had given their lives to sanctify the land, to sanctify the people, to sanctify the Judaism itself, right? And there we were kind of talking in theory. And so it wasn't so much the intellectual intimidation, it was very much the intimidation of, wow, look at these accomplished people, both the rabbinic leaders, the communal leaders, the people who are, think about those Islamic leaders who were the first to jump on board to come study at the Hartman Institute. I mean, these people are people of tremendous courage. And, it was interesting, just, Rabbi, I wanted to mention this thing about text. Rabbi Bennett, it's interesting. What I found was that in our cohort, I don't know if it was the same in your cohorts, the people who were really good at text, right, help the people who weren't really good at text, but the people who were really good, who came with these classic backgrounds, like we had a person in our group who could quote Shakespeare backwards, forwards, sideways, and upside down, or people who had doctoral degrees in philosophy, or people who had insights into mathematics and science, and nobody beat you up with their mind. Everybody lent you their talent and their creativity, and there was no posturing. It was just humans really encountering one another and trying to help one another, raise one another up. To me, that was one of the most beautiful things.
I just want to give a shout out, because at the beginning of our Hartman program, they're definitely, they pick these 25 rabbis from across North America, and, it doesn't, that sort of kind of elite program doesn't lend itself to small egos in the room sometimes. And we were having, Jim, I think you know what I'm about to say, we were very much having that there were a couple people in the room who were very clear that their voices were the important voices. And Jim, who was, the senior rabbi of this larger congregation, and so gently at one of our reflection sessions, really early on, pointed that dynamic out to everyone, and in a way that was a beautiful tochacha, and didn't, I don't think, shame publicly anyone. Changed our whole group. From that moment on, people got it. And that's when Jim Bennett became one of my Rabbis, was at that moment.
Well, you became one of mine that summer too, Daniel. So I'm grateful. And I'd love to actually shift our conversation away from Hartman, as much as I'd love to reminisce Bob, to answer your question, no, Rory came in later in a unique program that was created for communal professionals who were not congregational rabbis. There's so many facets of Hartman now. There's the Christian leadership and the Islamic leadership and the community leaders program and the rabbinic leadership program and the fellows, all the different fellows. But we all—
And Rory hasn't finished yet, too, which is why people will occasionally hear us give her grief about, we've got three Hartman rabbis and yeah.
So she's a junior fellow.
She's a junior fellow, yeah.
When you get to be a fellow, you get to wear this great badge of fellowship, But I'd like to shift. I think we should shift, especially watching the clock, because I'd love to hear the two of you reflect on both of the questions, actually all the questions that are sitting, but I'm wondering whether we could start actually with the third question that somebody anonymously asked about the possible overturning of Roe versus Wade, and which is actually related, I think, to Warren's more specific question about is somehow Christian theology becoming our national theology in a more explicit way. So I'll just ask the question, and I want to hear you guys answer before I do.
Daniel, go right ahead.
Yeah. Look, I think the thing that shapes my perspective the most on this question is the fact that I am the parent of a trans kid living in a red state. I don't know how much other folks follow the news, but a Trump judge, federal judge, who was rated as unqualified when he was appointed and has a lifetime appointment now, just allowed Alabama's statewide law declaring that gender affirming care for trans kids is illegal. It is punishable for the parents by 10 years in jail. And they are charging parents with child abuse. These are government goons showing up at people's homes, opening up investigations, taking kids away, placing them in definitionally abusive foster homes. I'm up terrified most nights, most weeks these days, Karen and I are, that something like this is coming to Missouri. We have these conversations that are talking about when do we flee and where do we flee, and is Illinois far enough? And it's the sort of conversations and the sort of absurdity and unreality that it must have been like for Jews in Europe in the early 30s, where like you have these conversations about when do we flee and where do we go? And then the next conversation is about like, finish your homework and we got to get you to soccer practice. And it just doesn't feel real, but it's very real, because if we lived in Alabama, we would have fled the state by now. And so this is fascism. I really believe it, that is what is happening. It's what's taken over and is taking over red state legislatures is fascism, Christian nationalist, white Christian conservative nationalist fascism. I think we have a Supreme Court filled with 5 justices who are white conservative Christians appointed by white conservative Christian presidents who lost the popular vote, but won the white Christian vote. So they got to be Supreme Court justices and presidents. And that's not talking about the one justice whose wife tried to overthrow a democratically elected president, right? The Senate by 2040, we're saying that 70% of Americans are going to live in 15 states, which means that 30% of Americans, white Christian conservative, are going to control 70 Senate seats forever. So I am terrified of what is happening. I think democracy has been lost for our generation and probably for our kids. I think it's about 50-50 that my family is going to have to flee the state within the next 3 to 5 years, which is just unreal to think about or to comprehend. I don't know what else to say about that, but I think fascism has come to America, to red states, with a cross and with a gun. I've gotten, I don't know, 10 death threats in the last 2 weeks. I get anti-Semitic. It's awful. I've been meeting with the FBI. It's terrifying. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I know that we all want to say that we're here to support you and we love you, and we are. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes. I have a lump in my throat and just listening to you talk the way you're talking. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to lift that up. But I also want to say the following. Since Rabbi Bennett invited me to go next, before he jumps in, I'm sure he'll say something eloquent as well. And I believe in America. I still believe in America. I still believe in democracy. The AFLP, right? Despite everything that's going on, I believe. And I believe that we will reach a moment in time, and Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, it'll be long before somebody with your talents and your passion and your love of this country and of Judaism and of humanity has to even think about leaving. And I'm so sorry that you're going through this. And I hope that you know that we are here if there's anything that we can do. Sort of makes my tzaros feel very small. When Mrs. Schwartz calls to complain about she didn't like the knishes on Shabbos, right? And again, for all of us, those little things console us because little things afflict us, right? So on some level, I hurt for you and with you. But I also just want to say, Ani Mami, I still believe. I believe in this country. I believe that there will be a mid-course correction. There has to be a mid-course correction. And it won't happen by fiat. It's going to happen because folks like us are going to make a difference, and we're going to raise our voices and say that this is unacceptable, and we're going to need to move forward and press forward on all these issues. So remember that wonderful Gemara that ends, right? When this one died, humility left the world. When this one died, wisdom left the world. And then at the very end, one rabbi has this audacity to say, I'm not worried, the Ika'ani, because I'm here. We're here. We're here. And we will not allow fascism to take over our country, because that's not what America was founded upon, and it's not what America is all about. And the good folks are going to have to stand up. And I think we've been a little quiet. And sort of shashtil, kind of quiet in our own little corners, preserving whatever it is that we're preserving. Maybe now really is the time. And in many ways, Daniel, your comments are kind of I hate to even use the term, but a battle cry, because I think it's going to be a battle. It's not going to come easily. But those of us of really, I think, good faith are going to have to, and I mean that in all senses of the word, going to have to stand up and bring tremendous support. So thank you for sharing, and I'll hand it over to Rabbi Bennett.
Well, I have a lot to say, but not a lot to add to what the two of you have just said. I want to say, first of all, I echo your sense of hopefulness and optimism and your commitment, Carney, and I know yours too, Daniel, actually, despite the terrifying experiences that you personally.
I'm definitely less optimistic. Yeah.
I know you are, but I think that it is essential that and it is built into our Jewish DNA, actually, and into our American DNA, as you said, Carney, that we have no choice to be optimistic, and we have no. I mean, we can abandon. There have been I have a relative who told me that at the beginning of the Trump presidency, they sold their house and rented so that they would be ready to leave the country should they need to. And I laughed at the time, and I don't laugh anymore, but I refuse to adopt that stance. I'm much more closely aligned with what you said, Carney, that I believe there are many more people than we know even who actually share a sense of optimism and hopefulness and a commitment to the core values that are much more universal than are evidenced by this minority rule that you're referring to. And now is the time for us to organize and for us to fight and for us to speak up. And I would say to those with whom I don't necessarily agree politically, in our Jewish community or in our suburban American, world, or all the various ways we can slice and dice our communities, those of you and those out there with whom I don't agree traditionally, this is a reckoning. It is time. And I think this, to the specific question, I think the abortion issue, the Roe versus Wade issue, is going to winnow out those who have been willing to set aside core commitments in their lives because of something else, whatever it is, a belief that economically maybe the conservative voices are better for them than the more liberal or progressive voices, or so I don't know what it is. I hope it's not a commitment to racism. I hope it's not a commitment to sexism or homophobia. I don't actually believe it is. I think that there will be a winnowing out, and that's why I remain optimistic that I think we are going to see a reaction to this extreme arrogance of the white Christian American evangelical, however you want to label it, swing in our country. And there's going to be a backlash. And I hope that it will be a relatively peaceful backlash and not civil war or something of that sort. But I do believe that there is cause for hope. And there's also a demand for hope. This is a time, as somebody said, this is a call to action. We cannot any longer afford to sit on the sideline, because even if our lifetimes will remain safe, our children and the next generations need us to act now, not to bequeath it to them to figure it out. So
I just fear that the levers of power in this country have already been stolen, that there has already been a coup that has happened where the minority of this country are going to be able to control and dictate our rights and our future and our path for so long, right? Like in my adult life, 40% of the presidencies have gone to the white Christian conservative loser of the popular vote. It's unreal. And I appreciate your optimism and hopefulness, both of you. I also want to hold out the fact that right now, loving families of trans kids in Alabama are fleeing the state. They are leaving. They are scared. They are having conversations about, right, like which teacher is going to grab their kids and drive to the state border if DFS shows up. It is terrifying, and it is happening. And I can't overstate how terrifying it is. Every parent of a trans kid that I know in a red state is up at night with panic attacks. It's, yeah.
And by the way, you're talking very personally, and which I appreciate very much, because the vulnerability you're showing, is in front of a large group of people, and it's being recorded. And I think it's a very powerful message. And I think you're 100% right. But we always think about that, that statement, right? First they came for the trans kids, and then they're right. Like, this is the slippery slope that we all are very much concerned about. And the question is, what's it going to take to rile us up? Right. And I think your passionate plea that you've just shared with us is something that's going to, a call to, not a call to arms, but, the action. We really need to be involved in this. It's going to be a fight, and it's going to be drawing some lines. And I'll just say, since we're talking about a group of rabbis here, and three of us are congregational rabbis now, Rabbi Bogard works in a congregation which I think prides itself on the orientation that CRC takes, right? But Rabbi Bennett and I locate ourselves in congregations, even though we take strong stands, right? Locate ourselves in congregations where I think the nature of the population is a little bit more homogeneous, and heterogeneous. It could be one way to describe a hetero versus homogeneous. We have a real diversity. I have some strong people, and what Rabbi Bennett said really struck a chord with me, and I think I'm beginning to see it. There have been people who have been strong supporters of the orientation that you suggested for economic reasons, Rabbi, right? I am going to vote for this president because I think it's going to be good for my business and good for me and good for whatever the things and my investments and things of that sort. But some of those people are starting to look, and I think it was particularly after the insurrection, that people started to take a look, right, and started to kind of back down a little bit from the very Fabrenta stand that they took, that, I support this president because, and don't you know that this is good and this is good and this is good and this is good. But when that transpired, it kind of was a game changer. And I think we're at that stage, Daniel, with some of the things that you're describing. And I think we should be yelling from the rooftops at this moment in time, much in the way in which the prophets of old, like Yirmiyahu, stood on the parapets of the city of Jerusalem and yelled out, this is the time that we're going to have to talk about it. And you're going to need to tell your story, and it needs to be out there. And now we, right, like Elie Wiesel said, we are witnesses of your story. Now makes us witnesses of what you're going through. We have to start saying that from the pulpits. We have to start saying that in our classes. We need to start saying that in the communities in which we find ourselves, that we could lose your family and your talent and your dedication because we didn't stand up and support you and your family. Shame on us.
And to bring this back to the issue of abortion rights and reproductive freedom, not to minimize the issue of the terror that families of trans children are experiencing. But, I don't want to over politicize this, but I know many people who continue to this day to say they justify why they voted for President Trump. And I don't want to debate that with anybody. But many of those people are, as you said, Carney, rethinking whether the consequences of that decision, which we now see played out writ large in the Supreme Court, which he nominated, legitimately or otherwise, with the aiding and abetting of other politicians in this country, whether the consequences of that now are going to cause grave harm to the first and foremost, the reproductive freedom of people in this country, and consequently many other issues, including transgender freedom and gay marriage, and who knows. And I believe, look, here's what I believe. I hope I'm right. It is never too late. No matter how far the pendulum may swing pretty far. It's already swung pretty far, and it may swing even further, but we cannot give up hope. We must not. And we're also not permitted, even in the Torah, we're not permitted to be, to refuse to take responsibility. We cannot.
Lo titalem, right?
Exactly.
We can't pretend like it doesn't exist or close our eyes. I don't see it,
We have to. And so we're right there with you, Daniel, but we're with anybody who is impacted and fearful. And I think our jobs as clergy people, as leaders, as teachers, is to continue to speak and to preach hopefulness and optimism, because otherwise then there's despair. And we are commanded not to despair. We
I,
cannot.
I'm with you in the sense that Jewish history gives me optimism sometimes, if only in the sense that you look at Jewish history and you're like, it could definitely be darker than this. Right? Like, which is an odd kind of optimism. One thing I want to mention is that Missouri has an expanded religious freedom statute. It's called the Missouri Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It was really put in place so that bigots could discriminate legally as long as they claimed it as a part of their religion. It was designed to discriminate against queer people. That's why it was put into place. But one of the things that we're hopeful of is that this might open up a path, even beyond the First Amendment and religious freedoms. This might open up a path to challenge these trans laws as well as the abortion laws from a religious freedom perspective in our state. So I've had conversations with the Columbia Law Center for Religious Liberty and the national and statewide ACLU about this, and they very much are itching to test this out in states like ours.
Somebody asked the question, where are our partners? And I think we have partners. You're naming some of the folks and institutions that could be partners to us in these issues. Now, the question is, in the religious, spiritual world, who are our partners, right? Because, in and around the Israel issue, right, it's the far right that tend to be those who are supporting the notion of the state of Israel and Zionism. And we hear about Christians United for Israel. And those are folks who are not our bedfellows for these issues in the slightest. And by the way, I have no problem having different bedfellows for different agenda items. I'm sorry to say it. I know sometimes it bothers some and somebody may challenge me on it. But, I don't mind going to a Kufi place and talking about why I think people should buy Israeli products, right? Because I want to help the state of Israel. On the other hand, when I don't disagree, I got to find other partners, and they exist out there. They might not be as loud. They might not be as bold, right? And they might not be as ubiquitous, right? But they're out there, and we know them. We know there are good people of faith out there, of good faith.
And many of them are denominational leaders. For example, the United Church of Christ, which is one of our closest allies, but many of them are individuals who are members of, or clergy of, or leaders of various denominations, including, the Catholic Church. There are many allies in the Catholic Church, although the Catholic Church officially is problematic, but there are many. And I want to say they are our friends and neighbors. So we need to be creating relationships and talking about these issues with the people who live next door to us and down the street and who go to school with our children and who are, our coworkers, and building those naturally occurring alliances that help us to bring this to the light.
100%.
And by the way, we should be marching. We should be marching this Saturday morning at noon downtown with the March for Reproductive Freedom. Those who are able should be going to Washington, D.C. or Jefferson City. As Daniel, you often role model for us. We need to be taking action, not just sitting here and shrying.
Well, just wait. I've already got plans for both of you to be in handcuffs in the state capitol next year. That was not a joke, to be clear.
No. Listen, it wouldn't be the first time for some of us, so it's okay.
We're there by your side. Let us know when and where.
Right. And something else about all of this notion that you mentioned, Rabbi Bennett, which I think is really important, the notion of finding the individuals who would support us. We need to activate those relationships as well. And we need to talk about it. And Daniel, that's why your story is so compelling to me and one that should be told. I would also think that, some of the work that our community is doing, we saw this wonderful article about cultural leadership, when we've seen the wonderful programs like the Student to Student. These are opportunities for us to be in conversation and dialogue, and our kids to be in dialogue and to be building those relationships with younger people who will be the future here. And what I think is that these, we talk about these folks as troublemakers of the best kind or whatever it is. Like, I've got to say that those relationships are really key and really consequential and really significant. And I'm watching the way even my own kid who's involved in this program, Rabbi Bennett, and I've had children who've done this in the past, and Rabbi Bogart, I know that CRC has been very involved. Like, these are the people of the future. And that's why I have the kind of optimism. There were 16, 18, 20 kids who came to shul Friday night. And the fact is that the issues that they were talking to us about are the issues that we're talking about right now. Now, they're at their perspective from 16 to 18-year-olds, okay? But they want to address these issues as well. And they know that something does not smell right in our country right now. Something is amiss, something is awry. And they know it. And I think they need to be activated and they need to be led in some ways, just as each of you are doing within your own communal structures as well. So there are some other comments in the side. I wanted to make sure that we were getting to some of the questions. Leslie Captain, over the summer, could we use this or a similar forum to instruct congregants on how to be politically active to support the causes that are threatening our freedom? I think the answer is absolutely yes, right? Absolutely yes. We should get together and talk about what to do, how to go about doing it. Look, people often know, what they want to do, or they want to do something, right? They know what they want to do something. They don't know what to do and how to do it. And I think, Daniel, in the way that you've helped us with technology, right? Like, you can also help us with this. There's a spiritual technology here that we can bring to people about how to address the issues that ail this country and bring us back to some kind of pendulum that swings more towards, some kind of equilibrium. We've gone just too far afield.
And, there are so many ways that we miss Rory's voice in here, but this is literally Rory's job at the JCRC that we're talking about right here too, right? Like, and that's an incredibly important and central forum for the Jewish community to express our outrage and our disappointment and our advocacy needs, and to stand up for the vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. What else we got in the questions? I want to make sure to get to some of the other questions that people have. Oh, somebody asked about what's something that you didn't expect in the rabbinate that happened to you in the rabbinate over the course of your years as a rabbi. Would the two of you like to take a crack at that? I think it's a worthwhile conversation. What are the things that you didn't expect that transpired as part of your rabbinate?
I would say the work I just described is definitely there. That, along with all of the tech stuff during COVID, that I spent a full year, I feel like, not being a rabbi, but being a live streaming producer. Now, thanks to Autumn being back, that's gone. But yeah, that's my short answer.
Yes, and it's funny. I went into the rabbinate 40 years ago, roughly, when I began learning towards becoming a rabbi. I think I went into the rabbinate initially because I had a passion for Jewish youth work. I wanted to be a camp director. I wanted to be a youth director. I wanted to be an old-fashioned youth rabbi when I was young, and somewhat impactful on inspiring teens. And over the years, my rabbinate expanded exponentially into so many areas of things. I don't know that I didn't expect them, but I didn't know that I would need to become an expert on so many things. One of them was unexpected, although I've grown to love it, which is the development side of the work we do. I had a background in economics before I went to rabbinic school. I studied economics as an undergrad to try and please my father and to make it look like I was studying something practical that I could actually use to get a job. But over the years, I learned that nurturing and providing the resources for the work we do is a sacred part of the work we do. And I didn't expect that. Nobody trained me as a rabbinic student. I think rabbinic students now are better prepared perhaps for that work in development, but nobody told me that or you even, Daniel, that it was our responsibility to nurture resources, be they the human resources, the precious resource of time and physical resources, but especially the financial resources that are necessary in today's day and age, and maybe throughout Jewish history, have been necessary to make possible the work we do. And sometimes I think people often take for granted, even a program like this, that the time and the human resources and the financial resources to make programs possible that are meaningful and educational it's a precious part of the work we do. And I've grown to love it. Not only didn't I expect it, but I've grown to love, that work as challenging as it sometimes can be.
So I'll add that also for me, that was sort of a bit of a surprise, but I was not surprised because my dad actually said to me, I once said to him, my father's rabbi. So he said to me, I asked him, what would you do differently? Sorry, this puppy. What would you do differently? What would you learn differently? And he said, learn something about business, which I did. which I actually cultivated in graduate school as well, and continue to do so. And so I, like Rabbi Bennett, I've learned to, I don't know if I would say love it, but to understand and appreciate it. I love the passion of people who commit to projects, the kind of the fire in people's eyes when you say something like, oh, would you be interested in this? And they say, yeah, wow, that would really like turn my crank, or that would really make my father or my mother happy. I know often people who've inherited significant wealth want to honor the people who came before them, and naming a school, right, for somebody, right, or saying to somebody, this sanctuary bears your family name or your parents' family name. Or we had somebody just renamed our banquet halls. We call them the Simcha Center. She wanted it named for her grandparents because she said she could see her grandparents dancing in the social hall. Right. And for me, that they said that, and they put a significant amount of money behind their commitment. And it was like one of these wonderful moments in time when we felt good about that. Also, when we walk into spaces that are inspiring, right? That when you walk in aesthetically, and somebody says, wow, I stand here and I sort of feel the numinous, I feel the sense of God's presence. Or how about spaces that are named for people that we cared about? I was fortunate enough to be with Rabbi Bennett at his shul when Rabbi Stiffman was honored with his second bar mitzvah, right? But to watch the love and the respect, and to see how people don't get forgotten, people who make an impact on a community. And, on some level, for a moment, I don't know about you, Rabbi Bennett, but for a moment, I kind of teleported myself forward in time to say, wow, like all the agmas nefesh, all the challenges, all of the things that we've gone through, all of the, moments when we felt we weren't treated appropriately. And it happens to every rabbi, right? There's always somebody who comes in and says something that shouldn't have been said. And we deal with those things. That's part of our challenge. I would say that those moments we could see that will be remembered by young people and old people. I'll say the last thing that surprised me, and then Rabbi Bennett, do you want to add to that before I say the last thing that surprised me? The last thing that surprised me, just how much people trust and share the most intimate details of their lives, given the opportunity to sit quietly with the cone of silence of our studies, of our offices, or over a cup of coffee in a private place in a park, wherever it is that we've been meeting with people. How much we're trusted, how much emunah, right? They have faith in us as shluchei, right? Tzibur, as emissaries, or people who are like, in my office, I have this plastic goat, which I know Rabbi Bennett stole from me borrowed from me. No, somebody in his stable. Yeah, they take no responsibility. Your fingerprints are not on the goat. But somebody brought this goat to me and said to me, this is my sacrificial gift, and you're my high priest. And I didn't know what to do with this sacrificial gift. I really needed, to be absolved of some transgression, whatever it was. And I needed to bring this to you. I cannot get rid of this plastic goat that's sitting in my office. Why? Because I knew I made a difference in somebody's life. And there's those little things, right? Sometimes it's a tchotchke, sometimes it's a memory, sometimes it's a memento, right? Sometimes it's just a little placard or something, maybe it's a book that just changes us when we realize, my God, we made a difference in the lives of a number of people. And so for me, I think I was surprised how powerful and how emotional those things make me. And I'm not one of those people who's particularly nostalgic in that kind of way, and definitely not about things. But sometimes it just catches me by surprise. And now, as this older rabbi in the shul, I'm like the keeper. Was Rabbi Lipnick's yahrzeit, and I'm the keeper of all the details and information that he shared with me and sort of downloaded to me. And now I feel the responsibility to download it to the next generation.
That was beautiful. I just want to add one quick thing, and then I'm watching the clock because I have someplace else I need to be quite on time. So I want to say an additional thing, because you triggered this, and I'm so grateful for everything you just said. I was also surprised to discover over the decades of my career how precious and dear to me the chavruta and the relationship, not only with congregants who I've had a chance to teach and learn from, and who have, as you said, touched me deeply by sharing of their intimacy, of their lives and their journeys. But in particular, I've been surprised by the intimacy and importance and critical nature of chavruta with colleagues like the two of you and Rory and others. I don't know that congregants, that, Amcha, the people out there, necessarily realize how important we are to each other and how lonely a profession this can be at times, and how precious it is to have people to share this journey with, like the two of you and Rory. And I'm immensely grateful for that. And I was surprised to discover that. I think I resisted, no, it's just a job. But it's a very precious job that I love. And also it can be
I just want to second
a lonely job. And so it is having students from whom we learn get meaningful.
Beautiful.
I just want to second that it's not the surprising part of the job, because this is why I got into it, but it never stops being an incredible honor to be invited into those moments with people, in those vulnerable moments, whether it's underneath the chuppah or meeting with a family before a funeral, or it never stops being an honor to be a part of those moments. And to me, that's the center of this work, the serving people at those times.
Yeah. Since I mentioned Rabbi Lipnick, maybe I'll finish with this, at least for me. Rabbi Lipnick used to say when he got his doctorate at WashU, that people would call him Dr. Lipnick, and he said, "Call me by my highest title." And they would say, "Okay, Rabbi." He'd say, "No, call me by my highest title," and say, "Call me Bernie," right? And the fact is that we have those intimate relationships. Somebody who comes to talk to you in intimate ways, yes, they know they're coming to you because you're a rabbi. They know they're looking for something spiritual from Jewish tradition or from spiritual traditions that we've been able to accumulate and to kind of store in our memories and in our hearts. But they also come to us because we're real people, and we put on our pants, one leg at a time, and we live real challenges with our families, with our spouses, with our children, right? We live with our own parents, right? All the things that we deal with. And when we're honest about that, so yeah, yes to all the things that were said, they're very beautiful, but also yes to the notion of being called by our highest titles, it's of who we really are. And I think maybe the thing that surprises me the most about the rabbinate, it's always allowed me to be the truest form of me, right? And it bears, I have to do my own cheshbon nefesh all the time, the sort of evaluation of self, like, is this really who you are? And if it's not who you are, you better get out of this, because you cannot fool people about who you really are.
Beautiful. I do have to say goodbye, but I want to say thank you. I want to wish everybody a peaceful and restful summer.
You too. Enjoy that sabbatical, huh? Well earned.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm going to follow you after. As soon as you come back, I'm going to go away.
There you go.
And as long as we're saying goodbye, I just want to pass on from the Facebook chat that Carney, there's significant appreciation for the puppy and requests that the puppy be here for future sessions too.
Well, dog backwards is God. So
maybe we'll rename it 4 Rabbis and a Dog. I gotta go. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Rabbi Bogart, thank you so much. And I hope this could be made available to the people who wanted to watch it. And let's be in touch. We've got to figure out a way to get you in front of our congregation as well to share what's going on. I think there's a lot of people who would like to participate and be of support to you and your family. And really, if there's anything personally we can do, please let us know. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't think I realized till you started to talk about it, how hard this has been for you.
It's awful. It's awful. And thank you. And I would love to be at B'nai Emunah anytime. Everywhere I go, I talk about the 2 poles of my Jewish neshama are B'nai Emunah and CRC, and my love for that place and that building, in particular, Camp Ramot Emunah.
Camp Ramot Emunah. Yep, we're going strong. We got I got a couple of kids working there this summer too, so which is good. Really, really nice. Okay, my friend, take care, everybody. Zai Gesund.